person becomes transparent, so to speak. And more you operate as the presence behind the person. When you do things, perceive things, so your life becomes no longer a manifestation of your conditioning, but something arises, the deeper intelligence that's unconditioned, comes through you. Thank you. Welcome to our meditation. An interesting thing to notice as you sit there, or rather here, is whether the usual voice in your head, which is the term I sometimes use to refer to your thought processes, thinking, whether the usual voice in your head is still very active, or whether it's beginning to subside and is replaced, to put it like that, by a sense of spacious presence, which is a very different state of consciousness from the usual state of thinking. A great opportunity to become aware of that spacious presence, which of course is awareness itself, is to notice in yourself that whenever I'm not speaking, like now, you're not thinking. If it works for you, as it should, so in the gaps between words, between sentences, there's an opportunity for you to access that presence in which you are conscious but not thinking. you're not only conscious, you're much more conscious in this state than in the usual thinking state. You're much more alert, more fully here and now, and ultimately also more fully yourself. Not the historical self that you usually identify with, you and your story, me and my story, the sense of identity derived from your life situation, which is also a story. But a deeper sense of self, much more real, to sense the beingness that you are, the I am, the presence, the consciousness, the awareness. It's very satisfying to enter that dimension. Or, let's put it this way, to allow that dimension to arise and realize that is who essentially you are. It's very satisfying. It liberates you from the personality, which can still operate and does still operate in your life. But it no longer defines who you perceive yourself to be, who you are. But something else also happens as you become more familiar with presence and allow it into your life more often. The otherwise very dense and cumbersome personality gradually becomes transmuted, becomes, one could say, transparent, so that the light of consciousness can shine through it. And gradually a very deep shift happens in you. More and more you become the unconditioned consciousness. In other words, as the personality no longer controls everything you say and do. Personality, of course, is the conditioned mind, conditioned thinking, as the personality no longer controls what you do, something else arises, and that presence begins to run your life. And eventually there are only remnants left of that personality, enough for you to function very well on that level in this world, and nobody who is not present would even perhaps notice that you are not a personality anymore. Another word for personality is self, the self that Jesus talked about, that the Buddha talked about. The self that the Buddha described as the fundamental delusion. And that Jesus talked about when he said, "Deny thyself." What does that mean? Deny thyself. It means, it is implied, that the self is not ultimately real, and you recognize its unreality, and then the self is denied. So it means recognize the unreality of the self. If it were real, why would you want to deny it? So when he says deny it, the implication is that it is not real. A false sense of self, a limiting sense of self. And whatever you think and do on the basis of this limiting sense of self brings conflict and suffering. You project limitation into everything you do and say and think. You create separation continuously through the false sense of self, which is a conceptualized sense of self. And as you sit here, perhaps something within you responds powerfully to this and enjoys the arising presence. It's also possible that the personality in you comes back up and does not like what's happening here. That's the conditioned self. So when you become restless or irritated, or suddenly switch off completely and start thinking about your problems, or even when you have thoughts in your head that says, I have no idea what he's talking about, that's the conditioned self or the personality which does not like what's happening here. Because what's happening here is ultimately voluntary self-annihilation, which is not really scary, because if the self were real, it would be scary. But since the self is ultimately not real, self-annihilation is the end of a delusion. And if your mind is saying, I don't understand what he's talking about, of course you don't, because you can't really comprehend this conceptually, although I'm using words which are concepts. But you cannot understand this through concepts. So why are we using words and concepts? The words and concepts point beyond themselves. They are pointers. They are not it. In the same way that the map is not the territory. And as the Buddhists say, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. So let's use another pointer. As the personality subsides, here and now, something more essential emerges, an essence, the essence of who you are. Some philosophers have used the term being to describe it, to point to it. And being, which you experience as the feeling or the sense of I am, your very beingness or essence, being is the one thing, of course it's not a thing, we're just using words, is the one thing that you can be absolutely sure about, the only thing that is beyond doubt in your life, the only thing whose reality is beyond doubt. Everything else could be a dream or an illusion. Whatever you perceive could be a dream, an illusion. You don't know that it's not a dream or an illusion. Because when this meditation comes to an end, then it evaporates into the so-called past. And everything that happens quickly dissolves. The same way that a dream comes to an end when you wake up. Except that this dream seems to go on and on, replaced by another and another. If it is a dream. But what is it then that cannot be doubted? That there is a consciousness in which, if it is a dream, whether it's a reality or a dream, doesn't matter, in which it arises, in which it is known, the light in which it appears. So your presence cannot be doubted. Whatever happens in that presence can be doubted. But for it to happen, there must be a presence. And of course, I said your presence, it's not your presence, it's the one universal presence, consciousness. I particularly welcome those of you who are getting tired of their personality, that cumbersome thing, that weight you carry around and creates the same old stuff again and again. It's a good point to reach, to become tired of yourself. That is sometimes misperceived, and then you think you're tired of the world, you're tired of living, you're tired of... That's a misperception. What you're really tired of is the self. And the world that it creates or seems to create out there. With the same old conflict, the same old problems, or different problems, but basically the same, deep down. Same old thoughts in your head again and again, the same complaints. Oh dear. So the spiritual path, there are many practices you can use in order to access the dimension of presence, which is the spiritual dimension. But the most direct practice that immediately accesses that dimension, we could call that surrender. What is that? It is to offer no resistance or opposition to whatever arises in the present moment. Whatever happens, whatever arises, whatever people say or do, to become one